mistrust. How blockchain technology restores accountability in the public sphere. Brian BEHLENDORF, Hyperledger.
When the Berlin Wall came down, I was a student at UC Berkeley. What happened in Berlin was extremely exciting to me and my friends at the time.
Thank you. It's really exciting to be here. No doubt you've heard about blockchain technology in the context of cryptocurrencies and lots of people making money in very fast and not entirely, let's say, just legal ways. But I'm here to kind of tell you about a whole group of people and a whole group of organizations that are working together to really look at the technology underneath blockchain, underneath these different cryptocurrencies, to try to understand, is there something essential, something interesting about these that can be used to solve some otherwise very intractable problems as the world has gotten more digital, as the world has gotten more integrated. As technologists, we haven't really answered this question of how do we build trustworthy systems? How do we build technologies that help us deal with problems in a world where people are trusting institutions less, people are trusting noteworthy figures less. How do we actually use these to reinforce some essential systems that we've had since the dawn of accounting, since the dawn of triple entry ledgers, double entry ledgers, that sort of thing. And really this underlying technology of blockchain technology, which I would kind of characterize as having two pieces, distributed ledgers and smart contracts, rests on this notion of building what technologists might call a shared multi-master database resilient to hostile actors. And to try to illustrate this, I want to try to run a little bit of an experiment here in the room. I'd like somebody here to yell out the name of a city. New York. Okay, New York. Now somebody yell out a color. Red. Okay, I heard red. New York City, red. And now a piece of clothing. A dress, okay. New York City red dress, right? Now, you've all heard different people here, I think they were different people, unless I heard the same person, yell out, New York City red and dress, right? Now, we all perhaps have written this down in our notebooks, we all perhaps have kind of memorized that, that's only 3. But if we were to go out later and try to compare, did you hear the same thing someone else did? If we were to compare a long list of things, that would be a bit challenging, right? But if we instead applied a hash to that, right? And by this, I might say, take the first letters of each of those, right? N, Y, R, and D, right? New York, red, and dress. So NYRD. And how many syllables was that? New York, red, and dress. That's pretty easy. That was 4. So NYRD4, right? We walk out of here, as long as we can all say to each other, NYRD4, then we know that we have the same copy of the full ledger. Now, as an algorithm, that might be very simple-minded and easy to attack, but technologists have come up with algorithms for being able to take this long list of entries and compress it down to really small hashes. Now, why is this important? Because all of us in this room have a shared understanding of reality because we're all here, we all have ears, we all witness things, right? But when we leave this room and we try to reconstruct what happened, knowing that each detail was the same and that somebody didn't yell out yellow or Berlin is actually pretty important to solving this reconciliation challenge that we have with modern systems. So now that we have this ledger, this thing that is hard to modify, hard to change without those change being noticed, we can do other things as well. I could take this glass of water, for example. I could drink from it. All of you could witness that. Great. But then I could also hand it to somebody off stage, right? And thank you for taking that water. I didn't drink it, I promise. All of you have witnessed that. Now, this is essentially an asset, right? This is a glass of water that I no longer possess. He now has it. And if I tried to claim to you that I was handing that same glass of water to somebody else, none of you would accept that as a valid transaction, right? This is now a digital asset in this world that we've created online. And now he has that glass of water, and he can now he can hand it to somebody else. I can't. You might want to hand it back to me. Thank you. And this is now something that we can put inside of our digital systems to implement digital assets, something that We could do if the world lived inside of Facebook or Google or Amazon, but that would have those organizations defining reality. And that would be a really big challenge for all of us. Oh, shoot, I should have skipped ahead to this slide here to talk more about it. So in this way, we create these distributed networks and create these shared systems of knowledge, of a history of transactions. We can implement digital asset systems that we trade back and forth. And then we can also create a world of smart contracts. Now, a smart contract might simply be a promise that I make, to say when I receive that glass of water, I will also then deposit 5 tokens in somebody else's account, right? And this is something that is essentially a promise broadcast out to the world so that when you see that transferred to me, all of you come to a consensus that says, all right, Brian has now transferred 5 tokens to another party, right? And this world of smart contracts laid on top of this world of shared ledgers is a way to really get to a degree of automation in the business world that you don't really have today. You have what is known as counterparty risk, a promise that might not be fulfilled, an obligation or a debt that might not be paid off, and smart contracts are a way to reinforce that and implement it. Now, notice I've talked about all this without having to describe the role that cryptocurrencies play in this. There are a lot of people who have built digital systems, cryptocurrency systems, on top of these 2 bedrock pieces, but there's a lot of other use cases. And if you think about, a lot of other industries that are using this are in the finance industry, where everywhere the finance world deals with the reconciliation of ledgers between different parties. Whether that's something like SWIFT, where when you send a bank wire through the SWIFT network to another bank, it takes 3 days to confirm that transaction because those parties have to reconcile their books and deal with closing and batch-oriented processes and all these different systems that need to be settled out in order to confirm that, yes, that $10,000 actually made its way. If we used a distributed ledger instead, that confirmation is automatic, is immediate, and that can be 5 minutes rather than 3 days. It also makes sense in supply chains, and I'll show an example of that next, as well as in healthcare, where the movement of digital assets, the movement of payments, the movement of healthcare records or insurance claims, or tracking of pharmaceuticals as they make their way from a factory to the recipient, is something that today involves a lot of human processes and a lot of cost in the system. So for the advocates of increasing efficiency, this is a really big deal. And where might we use this, not only kind of in a government setting, but in a societal setting? Well, we can really look at how regulations are implemented into these different industries and look at these technologies as a way to automatically enforce many of these types of regulatory environments. If I can't transfer a digital asset that I've already handed off, if I can't spend that twice, that is a whole category of fraud that is eliminated from systems. If there's a smart contract that defines the process that I might hand one thing off to another party under, or the compensation I might receive, or something like an options agreement, well, that's a way to enforce this automatically rather than depending upon lawyers and accountants and judges and bureaucracy to implement for us. But we can also implement directories and registries. We can get into digital identity and even participatory democracy. And let me show an example of each of these. So in the diamond industry, in 2003, there was a lot of pressure to stamp out blood diamonds from the supply chain. Diamonds that come from mines that employ slave labor, or diamonds that were used to purchase weapons. And the 88 nations of the world, along with the major diamond producers and intermediaries and retailers, came to an agreement around something called the Kimberley Process, which implemented a traceability mechanism for those diamonds, so that each time a diamond was pulled out of the ground and shipped from one party to the next, paperwork would be sent, actually faxed, to a central registry in Antwerp that would then digitize that and make that available so anybody could trace the history of that diamond. Well, that database got hacked. Not only was the information divulged, which wasn't the big deal because this is information that's intended to actually be shared within that industry, but the hacker came in and changed the color and quality of every one of the diamonds in the system in a way that could not be reversed. And this was because that was a central database. It was a database where they kept backups, but they weren't very good at doing change control. And that system was vulnerable to such attempts at fraud, and it basically rendered that system moot. So they moved to a distributed ledger to do that traceability. This is a system that is in production today that uses a blockchain where each time a diamond is passed off from one party to the next, A transaction is written to the ledger, and that transaction is confirmed by the party that receives it. In fact, the party that has ordered that diamond or is expecting it knows not to accept it if there isn't an entry for it in the ledger. This system is used by, has been in production now for about a year and a half. It's been used by about single-digit % of the diamond industry. A couple of million diamonds have flown through the system, and there's already been millions of dollars of attempts at fraud that it has kept from happening. Now, this system doesn't replace the need for auditors, doesn't replace the need for the need to know, hey, is the diamond that I'm looking at here the same one that's on the ledger? There's lots of technologies to enhance that. But at some point soon, if you're buying an expensive diamond and it's not entered in a ledger like this, you might have reason to suspect its origin. This is something now that can apply to other types of goods and services, where traceability through a supply chain is important. The seafood industry likewise has a series of agreements regarding where fish may be caught in the open oceans to try to keep overfishing from happening, to try to guarantee that nations have an appropriate balance in their quotas, that sort of thing. And there's a big problem with pirate fishing, which also involves labor issues as well. And so the seafood industry is implementing a similar traceability mechanism. But you still can't trust that when a boat shows up at port and says, I caught this fish at this place at this time, that that's necessarily true just because it's written to a blockchain. So in these projects, what they're also doing is adding information from sensors, IoT sensors on the boats, on the nets themselves that are in tamper-proof devices that measure GPS as well as the weight of the nets, so that when a boat comes into port, there's already data in the blockchain tracing a lot of additional information from verifiable third-party sources that allows you to put a score, a confidence score, on the claim that that boat made that it caught that fish at a certain place at a certain time. And then after that boat comes in, there's temperature sensors on the shipping containers and on other parts of the process that allow organizations at the end of that chain to know that the fish was kept at the right temperature and treated appropriately. All of this is about enhancing integrity in a process that spans so many organizations, so many jurisdictions, but also where there isn't really a central trusted third party to vouch for everybody in the system. Trust has to come from a proliferation of data, from a multiplicity of sources, and from long-term reputations being built on such a network. Now, we can use this as well for other types of registry services that we're usually used to governments providing for us, such as land titles or car title or other sorts of things. And the interesting thing here is there's countries in the world that had started digitizing their land title systems as a way to allow people who had traditionally owned land to be able to sell them and get mortgages and build their businesses, that sort of thing. But such centralized digital directories also were ripe for corruption because there was no paper trail. It was very easy to modify that to corruptively give this great beachfront property north of the capital to, say, the dictator's son or something like that. So systems like this are designed to enhance the integrity of such registry systems, but also could have served us well in the 2008 crisis in the United States with the mortgage crisis, where tracing who owned what, who had title to it, was actually a big part of the failure of that system. Not so much in the explosion of mortgages and CDOs, but in that great unwinding. Keeping track of who held title to property, who had mortgages against those properties, was something that involved bureaucratic processes that simply broke down in the mad rush, as anyone who saw the film The Great Short remembers. These tools can also give us a better path to digital identity than we have today. Some of you are perhaps familiar with the Aadhaar system in India, perhaps other central government-managed digital directory services. The problem with those is they kind of inherit the Facebook model of everything interesting about you being on the other end of a name and password or of a thumbprint scan or something like that. We all know we need a different approach. This is something that's breaking down and causing centralization in a really bad way, and leading to abuses of privacy and great concern, especially in the light of things like the GDPR. Many people are using blockchain technology now to reinvent how digital identity works, to be in a more decentralized, what's called self-sovereign or user-centric approach, where private information is held close to you in a wallet, and you use a blockchain not to store that private information, but instead to verify the integrity of it, using keys, using hashes, thank you, using all sorts of pointers to be able to say, hey, when I present my diploma to you, claiming I graduated from a certain university, that you can verify the integrity of that and the claims around it. And this is in production today in a number of governments. The British Columbia government launched a project with this, and there's another effort involving the government of Sierra Leone to give everybody there a digital identity and a portable credit history based on this technology. In 30 seconds, I don't have quite enough time to go into what I think is ultimately the biggest opportunity here, but which is to reinvent how a lot of decisions get made in democracies, using a lot of these building blocks that we've talked about as ways to build grassroots kind of policy making and thinking around how do we organize our efforts. And with that, I will simply say blockchains can help us build societies and government systems that are lean, auditable, empowering, accountable, and responsive. Thank you very much.